Good afternoon, everybody. You gentlemen who are taking a row towards the front over there, you're doing the right thing. You guys in the back, you're okay as well, but not as good as them. Because we love it when people sit close. Welcome to the Humanities Forum. My name is Ian Bernhoft. I direct that forum, which happens most Fridays in this very room. Glad you could be here today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what to expect, what the Humanities Forum is, and then we'll get down to business. So, first of all, what is the Humanities Forum? It's an initiative of the Humanities program that we put on to bring in speakers, writers, scholars, artists from around the country and around the world to ask big questions, to deepen your life of the mind, and to deepen your appreciation for the humanities. We have a few rules here, which you're about to discover. Rule number one is all those screens you're looking at are going all the way away. So you can, phones, those go in the book bags as well. We do not need any technological device other than a pen and pencil in your two hands on that desk. So you can be present to us and to each other. Second rule, equally as important as the first, is our guest, we'll be having a conversation with our guest, and after about 45 or so minutes, we kind of segue from me getting to ask all the questions to you getting to ask all the questions, and a student has to ask the first question. So don't sit around waiting for your professors, because I will never pass them the mic. Third rule is, afterwards, we have a reception in the great room. Very nice food, great way to start the weekend. You really ought to go and to talk to other human beings there. It'll be great. So those are the three rules. All right, that being said, let me introduce our guest. So, William Deresiewicz is an award-winning essayist and critic. He's a frequent speaker at colleges, just like this one, at high schools and other venues, and he's the author of 5 books, including the New York Times bestseller Excellent Sheep, which I believe some of you may have read in Father Brophy's class. His most recent book, which is not on the screen behind me because I didn't turn off image mute, is The End of Solitude, a collection of essays on culture and society. And his current project that he's at work on now is a historically situated memoir about being Jewish in modernity. Bill received his PhD in English from Columbia University, and he taught English at Yale for a number of years before becoming a full-time writer. He's held visiting positions at places such as Bard and Claremont McKenna College, as well as at American Jewish University and the University of San Diego. But as a writer, he's published over 300 essays and reviews, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Harper's, London Review of Books, all the best places. He's been translated into 19 languages and included in over 40 college readers and other anthologies. And he's also a member, and this is something we'll probably talk about today, of the board of the Matthew Strother Center for the Examined Life, a retreat and study program in the Catskills, New York. So, please give a warm Providence College welcome to Bill Deresiewicz. Your microphone's on, yeah?
I guess it is, yeah.
Sounds good? All right.
Good?
All right.
Okay.
We're cooking with gas. So, let's start here. You're somebody who occupied one of the highest rungs in higher education, right? And you're grimacing. It sounds fancy, but you
Never had tenure, but okay.
You had a position at Yale, right?
Okay.
And nowadays, you're known as somebody who's very critical of higher education and how it's practiced today. Walk me through how you got from point A to point B on that journey.
Well, I paid attention to what my students were telling me, or what they were trying to tell me, what they maybe didn't realize they were telling me, which was that their education was not serving them in the ways that I think it needed to. It wasn't helping them to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives. I mean, I understand that going to college to acquire specific skills to help you get a job on the job market is really important, and I would never say that it's not. But, we take kids, typically 18-year-old to 17, 18-year-old kids, and we have them for the first 4 years of young adulthood, which are incredibly important years in a young person's development. It's when you leave your family, usually for the first time, and you're beginning to find out, like you're trying to figure out what the world is and where you might fit in it. And I think you can figure those things out without going to college. But if you're in college, you need to, the great majority of your time and energy is going to be going to college, which means that colleges have an obligation to help students do that, to help students figure out who they are, what they want, what they're good at, what matters to them, what they think a good life is. I mean, it's an easier argument to make here at a Catholic university, and I say this in Excellent Sheep. Not everybody liked this. Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, his head exploded at the idea that religious schools are often better than secular schools, even ones that are theoretically more prestigious, at helping students figure these things out. But that it also doesn't mean that colleges like Providence can just kind of assume that this is going to happen. I mean, I think it's an ongoing effort, because so much in a young person's life is pushing in the opposite direction, right? I mean, I think the messages that kids get are overwhelmingly about, major in something that's the name of a job, do something practical in school, don't major in the liberal arts, don't be a sucker. So I think colleges have an obligation to help students understand how limited that view is, and how much it limits them and their possibilities in the world.
So you don't think, if we're going from 18 to 22 and trying to get a better sense of the world and our place within it, you don't think that's just going to happen organically, sort of on the side as I take my finance classes?
Well, why would it? I mean, for one thing, colleges become so consuming.
Consuming in the sense?
Well, I mean, even what just you spend most of your time at it. No, I don't think it's going to happen automatically. And I mean, to be honest, I think it might be more likely to happen if you're not in college. I'm not saying you shouldn't be in college, but if you're out in the workforce, that really, actually having a job, I think, accelerates the process of self-knowledge quite a bit. But if you're actually out of the workforce, you're mainly taking classes, you're studying, or you're partying, no, it's not going to happen, actually.
What's missing? Or to flip that question around, you say colleges have an obligation to help students discover themselves, right? And to get us the sense of their being in the world.
Yeah.
How should they be doing that if not? Because you're saying pre-professionalization and partying isn't the path forward necessarily for that.
And again, I'm not against being pre-professional. I mean, it's an important purpose of college, no matter how much you or your parents are paying for college, to prepare you for the workforce, absolutely. It's just not the only thing. It can't be the only. Listen, I think it's self-defeating in its own terms. I mean, I think if you want to find satisfaction in your work, you need to figure out who you are, right? You need to figure out what the right work for you is going to be. And there are people who say, don't think about that, don't worry about that, just get a job. In my experience, in other words, the experience I've seen in my students, that doesn't usually work out very well.
What was the experience you were seeing in your students? Because you said the way you started down this path was what your students were telling you, and you said maybe without them necessarily realizing it. So what were you seeing in your students that led you this direction?
They were rudderless. They didn't know what they wanted to do with their lives. And some of them would just kind of stumble around for much of their 20s trying to figure it out. And I would say most of them just picked one of the like 4 or 5 paths that all of their students were rushing towards.
Like consulting, finance, whatever.
Yes, law, medicine, and tech. And apparently even law and medicine are not. They've kind of gotten eaten by the others. And I would have students come back to me. I mean, students would stay in touch with me, and some of them would say, I'm really kind of miserable here on Wall Street, but now I'm addicted to the money, so there's nothing I can do. I feel like I can't get out of it anymore. Yeah, and these were kids like I'm sure your students, who were open, who were curious, who were smart, who had an appetite for the world, and it just seemed like the messages they were getting and the college education they were getting was just very often killing that. I had students who were exceptions. They tended to feel out of place at school. The ones who were really intellectually curious, who were seekers, who wanted something larger or higher out of life, those who were, I thought, the students who should be most well served by college and most celebrated by college and most prized by college, were the ones who felt like like weirdos, right? And often the messages are coming from their peers, quite frankly. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you studying anthropology?
Because they weren't on the same
weren't on the
track that
path.
everybody else was.
They weren't going to be maximizing their future income.
Is it, what role, like, okay, so you and I are both, our discipline is English. We like books, right?
Yeah.
We're biased towards books.
Yeah.
What role do you see the humanities, liberal arts playing in this? Like, so I'll just play the devil's advocate. Let's say, Bill, why would taking some English class help me understand any better who I am than taking my sports management class?
Okay. Because literature is designed to help you reflect on yourself. That is what literature is for. I've been thinking about this. I mean, why do we read otherwise? I mean, maybe there's some entertainment value. But I think everyone who loves books or has even loved one book knows the experience of being able to think. It's kind of mysterious. It's this kind of metabolic process that isn't always conscious. But you are thinking about yourself by thinking about a character. Maybe you love Jane Austen and you identify with Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. And somehow, again, consciously or not, her choices become ways of thinking through your choices and what it means to make a choice. I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to try to write about this more recently. My professor, who maybe not coincidentally was the son of an anthropologist, he once said that stories are a form of knowledge. He just kind of said it in passing, and I've never forgotten that. And I've been trying to understand what he meant. Maybe I should have just asked him. But I've been trying to understand what he meant ever since. What does it mean to say that stories are a form of knowledge? Because we come to colleges, we come to universities, and we are taught a certain idea of what knowledge is. And again, it's not that it's bad. It's just, so it's scientific knowledge, right? That is the paradigm for knowledge at the university. It's factual knowledge that's established through empirical means, whether it's the scientific method or historical research or investigative journalism. And again, that's great, but that tends to be what we think of as knowledge. What does it mean to say that stories are a form of knowledge? I don't think it's such an easy question to answer, but I would start answering it by noting that stories have been central to every culture we know about. Why is that? Why do cultures use stories to transmit their understanding of the world? I think it's because stories are models of life, right? I mean, when you read a story, you feel like somehow you are immersed in the world of the story and you can walk around in it, and it's a kind of simulation or simulacrum of life that helps you to think of it. But what I think is especially important is that the stories that are central to cultures are not stories with obvious meanings. You can think about the stories in the Old Testament. You can think about the stories that Jesus told, parables, the stories of the Zen masters or the Hasidic masters, or the stories that Socrates told. What made them powerful as stories was precisely that they did not have simple answers. They incited reflection. They gave rise to large interpretive traditions where we sit around and have conversations about what do we think this story means? What does Coriolanus mean? What's really going on there? So what I'm saying is this idea that we think about our lives and ourselves by studying literature is not something that English professors invented 50 years ago. Okay? This is something that cultures have always done, and we should pay attention to that. We should take that seriously.
You had your own, you didn't do English as an undergraduate, right? Didn't you? You came to it subsequently.
I wish I had. I mean, by the time I was halfway through college, I wish I had done that. I came from, first of all, an immigrant family. My dad was an engineer, and the only thing I was allowed to think about studying was science. I was supposed to be a doctor. And
So you were in the pre-professional, like, get a job track.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I didn't realize it until I was well into the work on Excellent Sheep. But what I didn't realize at first was how much I was telling my own story. I had never, as someone who had been pushed through this machine and been told, there's this one way to do it, and it didn't one of the big things that motivated me to write that book and to do all the writing and speaking that I do about this is precisely that I don't want other students to go through what I went through, which is that I felt, quite frankly, that I kind of wasted my time in college. Not because there's something wrong with studying biology, which is what I did, but it wasn't the right thing for me to study. And it took me a long time, even after college, to finally give myself the permission to study English Lit, which if I had been paying attention to myself, even in high school, I would have known that's what I should have studied. But it was unthinkable.
You see college, you've written about how it ought to have a sort of more of a moral element as well, in terms of cultivating.
You have to be careful how
Yeah.
we use that word.
Yeah. So I'll use the word sloppily, and then you take it from there. That it's not. I think your critique is like college can't simply be about getting accredited, getting your diploma that you can get the six figures with. College has to be understood as a time where your character is formed in a durable way.
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of an old language.
It is an old language, so
That I don't necessarily use it, so I'm not sure that I want to, but I do want to focus on that word moral, right? And people misunderstand that. People who tend to critique and, often in this kind of smug and sort of cynical and superior way, this idea that the humanities are important. Like, we're trying to teach students, we're trying to preach, we're trying to inculcate certain moral values and virtues. That was once the case in American higher ed, and I don't know how things work at a Catholic college, but most American colleges, including the Ivy League colleges, were church-affiliated institutions. The president was a minister. He would preach to the students every Sunday. There was a specific set of values and virtues that were being inculcated from the Christian tradition or from the classical tradition. That really hasn't been the norm for a very long time. Society secularized, most of the colleges secularized. We became more pluralistic. So now, to me, it's not about telling students what to believe or how to live, but giving them the means to figure it out.
I guess by moral, I mean, if you look at the slogans that colleges have, right? It's like pursuing truth, being a better self, like Providence College, for those who seek more. It has this aspirational, like, you're trying to discover a higher truth or a higher you. Like that,
Listen,
that has moral valence, right?
I don't think that's what the slogans look like at most colleges, though. Again, I mean, it's
In practice, or
it's
like
different. No, even in practice. I mean, I think being a Catholic school is a little different. I would say that the typical college slogan now is, change the world, make the world a better place. So it's about social justice or a kind of social mission.
that's still moral, right? It's still moral.
Yes, it is, and I would say that the problem with that. So my narrative is right. So there used to be this very particular kind of moral mission that colleges had, and even when society and universities secularized, there was a kind of secular version of that was often understood in civic terms.
Being a better citizen,
being a better citizen, and also sort of great books programs were about sort of developing the whole self, building character, right? Even if that word maybe wasn't used as much anymore. The 60s, 70s, 80s kind of destroyed all that. I mean, the 60s kind of relativized it out of existence and kind of dethroned the authority that school administrators and professors would have once had to kind of stand in front of students and sort of preach like that. And then even more, sort of 70s, 80s, what people call neoliberalism, really stripped everything away from the college purpose except the sort of practical, market-oriented, maximize your income. I think what happened more recently is that when the progressive ideology loomed into view, I encountered it when I got to graduate school in 1989, but it really didn't break out of the graduate departments and the humanities departments until around 2012, 13, 14. All of a sudden there was this ready-made moral system that colleges could have, because I don't think colleges were happy thinking like we're just producing people for the market. I don't think professors' sort of self-love really wanted them to believe that. So all of a sudden there was this ready-made moral system that colleges could kind of adopt wholesale. And that became the new morality. But it was, I mean, it's sort of, we're back to the 19th or 18th century where it was a morality that is being preached at students. Believe this. Don't explore what you believe this. We are all together going to accomplish this political mission. And I think it's disastrous. I mean, we could talk about this more. It may be less relevant for this school, but I mean, it's been disastrous for students' ability to think, to disagree, to debate, to have a rich college experience where you're testing ideas, because there's so many ideas that are considered off limits because they're considered dangerous.
I mean, I think that that's something a lot of students relate to, right? That they're afraid to have open disagreements or have honest conversations because they're worried. It might mean it's not being enforced by the college, but it's being enforced socially through the social media and their peers and so on and so forth. So I think they would recognize that phenomenon. So basically, you're saying, like, for a while, the energies of college became much too much just about, like, responding to market forces. So you're cultivating students for the market. And I read somewhere in one of your essays that, I don't know if this is your line or you're quoting something, but, like, the job of Yale University was to produce Yale alumni who are going to, give money back to Yale, right?
A friend of mine who's a Yale alumnus said that to me. Okay. Yeah.
And in your telling, though, that sort of ultimately, like, because that's kind of bleak, like, what's the point if it's just money, then this more sort of, like, dominant progressive ideology emerged as kind of like, oh, this is our purpose now for education.
I think so. And look, I mean, that ideology was already being incubated in the academy. And I think, like I said, like, literally, like, how did English professors or history professors justify their existence 20 or 30 years ago? Or justify, like, what argument would they make to students or parents, like, why you should major in something like that? Well, we're teaching you
learn to think and write and communicate.
Instrumental skills that implicitly and even often explicitly would make you a better lawyer. I mean, a lot of my students became lawyers. And there's nothing wrong with being a lawyer unless you're doing it because you can't think of anything else to do. So when this new rationale came along, and all of a sudden we're going to be like, dismantling the patriarchy and destroying capitalism and erasing the gender binary and, fighting American empire, like, that's a lot more exciting.
Pivoting a little bit from that, but maybe not too far. So you called your latest collection The End of Solitude. And I think, let's begin with, what do you mean by solitude? And then why do you see it as such an important sort of positive good in the development of humans?
Right. So the title of the book comes from the title of the first essay, which is an essay that I wrote in 2009, kind of reflecting on my initial experience on social media. Actually, Facebook, everyone my age, all of my friends joined Facebook in 2008. And I immediately started to see what it was doing to us, to me, to our ability to be solitary, right? So the way I explain it is, there's being alone, there's aloneness, which just means you're alone. It's an objective state, it's a neutral state. Then there's loneliness, which is the negative experience of being alone. It's a lack, it's an emptiness, it's a kind of grief. And then what I'm calling solitude, and I compare it to what Whitman calls idleness, it's being alone in a full way, in a way that feels creative, generative, that somehow you are getting in touch with yourself, not necessarily because you're engaging in introspection, although that can be part of it. Maybe you are, maybe you're writing in your journal, maybe you're writing a letter to a friend in which you're sort of, that's what we used to do when I was,
I remember.
Do it, right? You write a long, long letter to your friend where you're kind of working out your thoughts. But I think the same state happens when you are immersed in a book, especially a work of literature or a work of philosophy. I think it can happen in nature. I think it can happen with other forms of art, with music. But the point is, you are somehow with yourself instead of what social media has done to us, which is constantly being in the presence of others, receiving input from others, performing for others. And I mean, is this connected to stuff we've been talking about? Like, how do you know, how do you find out who you are? How do you build a self that's strong enough so that when the world pushes against you and makes demands of you, there's something there to push back, and that can say and that feels entitled to say, no, this is what I want to do. No, this is what I believe. And I think solitude is a really important component of building that self.
But solitude is essentially what attention technologies are trying to eat into.
Yeah.
So your argument is we need to have that time alone. We need to have that time where we can be not even reading or just being present to ourselves.
Present to ourselves, yeah. That's a good way to put it.
In order to get a sense of who we actually are and what we're all about.
Yeah. I mean, Marilyn Robinson, I forget what essay this is from, but she talks about how, well, I mean, I think she's talking about sort of early modernity and early Protestantism, and how now everyone, has access to the Bible and is encouraged to read the Bible for themselves. And then that gets secularized, right? So what would once have been reading the Bible, or maybe reading Luther or Calvin, becomes reading Wordsworth or Dostoevsky, right? But that an idea emerges, or maybe an idea gets universalized sort of in the early modern period of this practice of reading, of solitary reading, because also reading used to be in groups, right? Mainly because most people couldn't read, but it was a very different kind of experience. So this idea of solitary reading, and it's registered in Jane Austen and other 18th century authors. In ways that I think it's hard for us to appreciate. We have selves of a kind that didn't necessarily exist for most people. Maybe for monastics, maybe for the literate, but not for most people. This precious thing, this modern self, well, the word is individual, right? Which I think Rousseau, as a noun, I think it was Rousseau who first used that word. And I feel like we're losing that.
Maybe in this context, do you want to talk a little bit about, or actually, no, let me go to this question, because it also leads us this way. There's a lot of the threads that we're touching on here. We could just hop on the let's doomsay about technology and write it all the way down to the bottom, right? Because we see how, right, like the various digital technologies and our attention economy, all this, it undermines our ability to read. It undermines our ability to be alone. It undermines our sense of having a self independent of constant distraction. I guess but we don't need to ride that roller coaster down. Let's see, what do you see as particularly important for, say, young people to hold on to nowadays, or what habits of mind to cultivate? Like, basically, what are we going to do in order to grow into a clearer sense of ourselves in a world where I'm constantly getting buzzed by my
Yeah.
so on and so forth? And
let me say, I mean, and I'm not accusing you of this, but people will say, well, old people have always complained about technology and blah, blah, but that's actually kind of a lazy argument. Like, we really need to look at each technology and what it's doing to us. And listen, I grew up with television, and actually television did do terrible things to us. It doesn't mean there's nothing valuable about it, but yeah, I mean, I spent like 6 hours a day when I was a kid watching television. I don't think it was particularly good for me. And now, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, I think this would have been maybe a harder argument to make to a room full of young people, but like, it seems like they know it now. Like they get what all of this stuff is doing to them and are trying to figure out ways of defending themselves from it. And it's not easy, because these technologies are addictive. I mean, there was just that loss, right? They just
didn't Meta just lose?
It was Meta and one of the others, and they lost, right? Because they are deliberately. So what do? I mean, it's hard. I think you have to consciously manage your relationship to these addictive technologies. The way that people who have a drinking problem have to consciously manage their relationship to that. Maybe an eating disorder is a better example, because you have to eat. You can just not drink. And you kind of have to be on your screens to a certain extent. But it's about you use the magic word, you use the word attention, right? Rebuilding your capacity to pay attention, to read for more than 5 minutes at a time, etc.
In this context, do you want to talk about the Matthew Strother
Sure,
film for
sure.
Life?
Yeah, I mean, I had a student named Matthew Strother who thought a lot about these things. He was also one of those seekers who was who felt out of place in college, and wanted to continue to study seriously even after college, and was having trouble finding a context in which to do that. So eventually he decided that he would just have to start a kind of school for himself, but it would be not just for himself, but I should say by himself. And the idea was that a place where adults, outside of a degree program, could go and study serious works of literature and philosophy, and it would have a retreat aspect so that you go off into the country and you're not using your phones, and so on and so forth. And Matthew didn't live to see this vision. He developed cancer and he died when he was 35. But his widow, with the help of others, mainly, including myself, have realized this and is now, I mean, it's a small program. It's just like 4 sessions of 5 students each. We plan to expand it. We plan to have to sort of run satellite programs in other areas. But, I mean, there are more and more of these things now. So if things meaning serious humanistic study outside of the context of universities for adults, for post-college age people.
If you go on one of these things, it's a very intensive, immersive, unplugged experience, right? Can you
Unplugged.
tell me about that?
Well, so we go, I mean, I taught 2 years ago. It was one of the best experiences of my life. We went off into, he and his widow bought a property up there in upstate New York. And you go and you turn off your phones. It's a 10-day, it was then a 10-day program. It's a little shorter now. And you're just with each other for 10 days on the farm. Reading a single book. I taught A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It's like a 250-page book, and we spent 10 3-hour sessions on it, which would be the equivalent of like 3/4 of a semester on one book. Because when you read deeply, we actually didn't even have enough time. We could have done it twice as much. So it's deep reading, deep immersive reading, long conversations. In the evenings, we do sort of creative stuff. We did a staged reading of Waiting for Godot. My TA decided if we were going to do Joyce, we should do Beckett. And it's amazing. I just wish that it were easier to scale. I think, like I said, I think there's a tremendous hunger for serious reading, for deep attention, for community, right? Real connection with other people. 10 days alone in the woods with a small group of people who are serious about what they're doing. Having conversations where you're really paying attention to each other. I think this is all, I mean, it may sound less rare for college students, because I think college students, if they want to, can still have some of these experiences. It gets really hard once you're out of college.
I think I'd be interested to hear what the audience says. I imagine it's hard in college as well. Nowadays, because I think your attention is so fragmented.
I think so, yeah.
I'm sure there's at least one person in the audience who, when they hear the term deep reading, doesn't know what you mean by that. Like, is that just reading, deep things? Like,
no, it means reading A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and talking about it for 30 hours. It means, not coverage, not we got to get through this, but like we are going to sit with this. I mean, we spent the first hour of the first day just talking about the title. That's what deep reading, I mean, that's the first thing that it means.
And how is that, what does that do for your attention? Like, how does that stretch your attention muscles? I don't know if muscles.
No, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that paying attention actually feels really good. I mean, in a different context, we would call this meditation. And there are Catholic versions of this, right? It's like, it's you're focused on one thing. You are not, you quiet sort of the hamster wheel that's constantly, the hamster in your mind that's constantly running around the wheel. And I think that you develop that capacity by doing it. Like any other skill, right? You develop it by doing it.
I know I've read there's studies of multitasking, and the people, because some people are like, I'm a very good multitasker. Right? And they actually look at their cognitive capacity, and it just is a downhill slope. It's just, the more you multitask, the worse it is. And even if you think you're a good multitasker, you're actually just doing worse at everything. So I do see how, and I feel this myself, how the experience of being pulled in different directions, of your mind racing, of multitasking, it is like a profoundly unhappy experience, I think.
Well, I think so. I mean, they say that, kids who grow up with it, I mean, maybe they feel differently about it. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's really a natural thing for human beings to do. And I think however much technology and society change, we as evolved beings don't change. I mean, or at least we don't change on that time scale.
So let me ask you a hypothetical question. Say you woke up in the morning tomorrow, and you're 19 years old, and you have a vague sense that you are you.
Fish.
Yeah. Yeah, there you are. You're at Providence College. Everybody's going to the Darty in the afternoon, and you're like, okay, I have my college years in front of me. How am I going to live my life?
In college.
In college, practically speaking, what are you going to do?
Listen, understanding that this is much easier said than done, I would say don't be dragged along by the herd all the time. Like if you want to sit and read a book because you're really into this book and your friends want you to go drinking, like maybe you say no. Maybe you say no some of the time. I don't know how much of an issue this is here, but I know that students can often overload on extracurriculars and do many, many different things at once. And I think that that's not a good idea. I mean, it's hard, you sort of, I think when you get to college, in some ways, you're like, a kid who's been released into a candy store, and you want to try everything, and there's an understandable impulse to do that. But like you said about multitasking, the more things you try to do, the less you're getting out of each one of them. So I think trying to govern that impulse is a good idea.
And then you get to class on Monday, and you're hit with, I don't know, I just assigned my students Shakespeare last week, or something hard, right? Something that's you read it, and you're like, I don't understand. I don't think I want. This isn't fun. It seems like it's a lot of work. Why do you stick with that? What happens when you? Does that make sense as a question?
It totally makes sense. So let me go back and say, and I imagine that as a professor you're going to like to hear this. I would also tell students to do the reading.
I like that.
I mean, I would also say take classes that you're interested in. Take classes with good professors. I think, I was just reading about this. I forget who said this. I think, I don't want to overstate this, but I would say as a rule of thumb, the only things that are really worth doing are hard things. I mean, it's great to hang out with your friends. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. But in terms of purposeful activities, your question, you go to class and you're reading Coriolanus and it's hard, and why would I want to do that? It's like, why wouldn't, easy things are boring. You're building, I mean, it's like going to the gym and lifting weights, right? It's like, it's not just that, you feel like you look better, but it actually feels good to develop your body, even though it's hard. It's because it's the resistance, literally in the case of lifting weights, it's the resistance that builds your capacity. And it's the same for anything.
This is the lifting weights thing. This is the only argument that I've come up with so far that I think might be good in terms of why should you want to not use AI as a student, right? Because AI can you can basically offload whatever cognitive stuff you want to offload.
It's like sending a robot to the gym to work out for you. You can do it, but you won't get any of the benefits. All you will do is get your work done. But the purpose of doing the work in college, I mean, maybe it's different on a job, but in college, it's not like the teacher needs to read your paper. No.
Nor wants to read your paper.
The purpose of writing the paper is to write the paper.
But I think to believe that, though, you have to believe that the experience of going to class and studying and reading is actually changing you, right? Because if you're like, no, Bill, I'm trying to get good grades so I can get out of here and make six figures, then that argument doesn't hold water, right? You have to believe that the work itself is valuable, the work of studying.
Well, for one thing, I think that if you're doing it just to make six figures, you're going to be kind of miserable. I mean, this is sort of what I said before about, like, there's nothing wrong with being a lawyer if you want to be a lawyer. I mean, what I write about in Excellent Sheep and what I saw with my students, and there's actually a psychologist named William Deresiewicz who's written a book called The Path to Purpose, and he said that people who work really hard doing something that they have a sense of purpose about, actually, like, they really like that. Like, they'll want to work more. They'll want to work all the time if they're really kindled about it. What makes you miserable is working hard for something that you don't actually care about, that it's for the sake of some exterior reward. I would also say, I mean, I'm actually a believer in trusting your feelings as long as you're really paying attention to your feelings. And I think that there are sort of superficial pleasures, and then there are deeper pleasures. And I think the kinds of pleasures that come from working hard, thinking hard, reading deeply, those things are enormously pleasurable. They're just less obviously pleasurable. They tend to be not the kinds of pleasures that our society sort of suggests to us, mainly really because they're not so lucrative for third parties.
When you say trusting your feelings, that's not necessarily trusting what feels like it'll be rewarding in the present moment, right? It was like when I was in college and I had the choice between reading Spinoza and watching basketball. I watched basketball because reading Spinoza seemed awful.
Well, again, I mean, first of all, I think there's a place for different kinds of pleasure. It doesn't mean you should never watch basketball. But I mean, don't you end up feeling just kind of empty if you've just watched basketball or scrolled on your phone or played video games? Like, at each moment, it sort of feels pleasurable, but, like, it just feels like empty calories in the end.
Yeah. No, that's a good way of putting it. There's another microphone. Can I get somebody to be my microphone runner? Ian, will you do it? All right, yeah. So I want us to stop monopolizing the mic, as I said, and open it up to questions. Make sure, so you raise your hand, you elbow out the professors, and then you wait for the other Ian to bring the mic to you. So here, let me give you this one. I'll grab the other one. So who wants to take the first question for our speaker?
Hi. I guess my question would be on the topic of kind of making students buy in. If you were to, like, for example, I'm an economics major, but, we have core requirements here at Providence. If I'm taking an English class, kind of to Dr. Bernhoff, like, what is going to convince me to pick up the book over watching basketball on a weekend, or, how am I going to buy into a class that isn't relevant to my major exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I kind of don't believe in trying to convince students, trying to, like, wheedle students into taking it seriously. And I know professors sort of feel they have an obligation to. I kind of feel like if you want to do it, and if you don't, you can. I think no one's ever asked me this question before, so I don't really have, like, a ready-made answer. I think that let me just say that I think if I were teaching now, I would experiment with different kinds of assignments, and not just because of AI. I mean, the typical paper, I think it has its uses, but I think that there could be ways of getting students, and maybe your professors do this already, getting ways of students to respond to texts that engage them in different ways that might bring it alive. I don't know, what would your professors have to do?
Well, I've had a handful of classes. I guess I can reference on PSP class, which is it's like a community engagement class, community service. We have a civic engagement requirement here. And one of the things that he likes to do is more in-class participation assignments where you're working alongside your peers rather than writing a paper. So I don't know how you exactly would integrate that because this is a community service class versus...
I think you can totally integrate that into a literature Absolutely. Yeah,
Very good. Thank you.
sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I also have a question about the context. Just it's in the context of being at Providence College. I feel like it's a trend in higher education right now, just moving away from liberal arts curriculum in general. And I feel like at PC, there's been a lot of emphasis on the nursing school and potentially building an engineering school. So I was just wondering your thoughts if you're seeing that in higher education as a whole, or
Yeah,
just
of
wondering your
course.
thoughts.
I mean, if you look at the numbers of, not just of humanities majors, but even of many of the social sciences, they've been plummeting. It's hard. I mean, you're not going to, I mean, I don't think you should force students, although they do force you. And I think that's great. I mean, I really am a big believer in core curricula. But it's always, I mean, to go back also to the previous question, it's always hard. It's like professors in universities, colleges design, you know, they design an education that they think you should get. But then it becomes a chore. If it's a required course, it sort of has the potential to become a chore. And the opposite end of the extreme are those schools that have no requirements at all. And that works for some students, and for a lot of students it doesn't. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think about it?
I agree. I think the core curriculum is really important here. That's part of the reason I wanted to come here, but I feel like there's a general consensus of it's more of a chore, and I don't really want to go to class, and a lot of the time I think that results in students not doing the reading and not really being able to engage fully.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a tension, right, between, on the one hand, no offense to the Assemble Company, but you might think 18-year-olds are not the best judges of what will be good for them and what they'll really benefit from. And so there's something to be said for like forcing people to do things. And I would include myself in that. Like, if I was 18, I wanted to be forced in a certain way to do things that were good for me. On the other hand, I think you've written about this, that the university model has moved more and more towards businesses serving consumers. And we've got to keep the consumers happy. And if the consumers don't want to be doing difficult classes they don't really like, then we won't demand that because we want to keep you,
That's right.
paying.
The customer service mentality, that's what they call it. Yeah. Who's next? Matteo, right?
Yes. Thank you very much for coming to speak with us. I have a question about pretty much the same thing, but a question about the different classes, and I don't mean academically and not curricular, but the classes of people at our school, but at every school really. In Emily Dickinson's school, students were classified as either being saved with hope or without hope. And some people might be really scandalized at this, but I do think it's a very natural way, according to human perception, to judge people by these standards. We can't really help it. And it may be true that everybody has hope, but sometimes it's hard to see. And looking around this campus, professors often judge students, and we judge each other by whether we are intellectually saved with hope or without hope. Whether we go to the humanities forums or the symposia, the debates, whether we go on retreats, whether we're in honors civ or not. And then professors will maybe see that a student doesn't partake in any of these activities and not invite them to these activities. So we have these kind of divisions among ourselves. And I'm wondering, how, for somebody who is intellectually with hope and not yet saved.
Is that you?
That's a lot of people I know,
okay.
and me, and I think almost everybody in this room, maybe, hopefully. What can we, as not individuals, because I think that's too easy to answer and also too hard to do, but as friends, as a community do, and along with our professors, or just as in our friend groups, what can we do both to reach out to those who may want more but don't know how to reach for it, and among ourselves to protect ourselves from a life of dissipation?
So, an easy question.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't know, maybe there's some sense in which this is already happening here, but there's no law that you only do the reading that's assigned for your classes. Like, what if you had extracurricular activities that involved getting together and having, I mean, in an adult context, you call this a book club or a reading group. In other words, a self-organized intellectual, not just intellectual life, that students lead together as a way of enriching themselves beyond the curriculum, sort of taking what you're learning in your required classes and kind of running with it farther. Not doing required reading, but sort of creating a fellowship of kind of like the Matthew Strother Center, right? Like where you get together and you read. Maybe you just read one book together over the course of the semester. Or maybe it's a fellowship or a group that's for some other kind of purpose, maybe what you might call a moral purpose. Does this sort of make...
One of my professors said, don't read exactly what you've been assigned, but read how much or more than you've been assigned.
Interesting.
The only thing is it's pretty hard to do when so many people are schedules. It's hard to do.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's a matter of priority. Like maybe you would spend less time, I don't know, on social media or drinking or watching basketball. I don't know. I mean, listen, it's easy for me to moralize like that, and I certainly wasted a lot of time in college. And it's also easy for me to say that I wish I hadn't, but I do wish I hadn't. And I wish I had somehow been in an environment that sort of encouraged me in the direction of virtue rather than the direction of vice, in the sense of just kind of wasting my time with trivialities. So you could maybe help create that environment for each other.
So
We're just going to go in a row. Okay.
pretty much. I took a class with Dr. Bernhoff last semester where we talked a lot about well-roundedness as a student, and I know you briefly touched on the experience of being a student and wanting to do everything. And I'm just wondering, how do you get to the point of knowing who you are and what you want to do without trying everything?
Well, that's a good question. I think maybe you do that when you're a first-year student, and then you start to sort of throw out the things that are not. Yeah.
And I guess also just on the concept of well-roundedness in general, like how do you feel like well-roundedness prevents, and like I feel like it's so emphasized that you should be well-rounded, especially with the core curriculum and everything else, like it's encouraged to be well-rounded as a student and as a person. I guess how does that prevent people from really getting down to like the thing that inspires them or the thing that
Right.
they're meant to do?
I've never thought about this, and I realized that maybe I don't like the idea of being well-rounded. Maybe you're making me realize that. And that's part of what's happened to the college admissions process, where you have to do all of the things. And that much didn't used to be the case, and certainly not in the same way. It sounds great, like you're well-rounded. But maybe that's not the best thing. And there's a writer, Megan Daum, who has an essay where she says, you know how people say you should try new things? No, you shouldn't. Again, it's maybe different when you're 18. But I actually realized that myself. I won't go into the details, but I was going to try to do a new kind of, actually I was inspired by Megan Daum, who's a great personal essayist. I'm like, I should try to write personal essays. And I started, I realized I'm really not good at this, and I could work and be better, but like I'm 62, I don't actually want to, I just want to keep doing the things I'm already good at, and I think that's okay. Yeah.
Well-roundedness becomes another sort of hoop to jump through, right? Where you've got a bunch of boxes to check off. So I got to be,
Yeah.
a good athlete and a good musician and a good community service person.
I think it was Helen Vendler, sort of the great critic of American poetry, who wrote something for Harvard Magazine some years ago, where she said, T.S. Eliot, who's one of the alumni that Harvard likes to boast about, he would never have been able to get in, because he didn't do sports, He just wrote poetry.
To me, the state, I mean, I don't know what I know. I don't know nothing. But to me, the state of higher education today seems to come down to a simple value proposition. And I think one of the ironies is that as college has become, or getting a degree, undergrad or grad, as the cost of that has gone up, as the value of education has gone up, the actual value has gone down because the true intention of the university, seeking truth or whatever it is, or, students they're not aligned with that anymore. They're increasingly just going to school in order to get the job, as we keep saying, right? And that's not what the inherent function of higher ed has been, right? So to me, it seems like higher ed is at a place where they need to redefine what the value is that students are going to be receiving when they come in. It's not the job, as you've been saying, and it's not the grade, because students are choosing to use AI, or they're choosing cheat methods because they have to get the good grade, or they want to get the good grade in order to have the good GPA in order to get the good job. But if it's not about the grade anymore, if we start defining the value as what you're learning and the process of engaging in critical thinking,
Yeah.
and challenging friends and debate, or the whole process, the dialectical skills that college is supposed to, cultivate in you. If that is where we start, teaching value, then I think higher education can be saved. But as long as the cost continues to go up, I'm wondering if you agree that as the cost has gone up, that's kind of ruined higher education.
Well, what's ironic is that the reason there's been an ever-increasing focus on the practical is one of the big reasons is precisely because the cost of college keeps going up. And I understand that. I mean, the more money you're paying, or your parents are paying, or the more debt you're taking on, the more you need to ensure that you're maximizing your future income. It's totally understandable. So this is a much larger social problem, which is how do we lower the cost of higher education? I mean, it's easier to talk about it in the context of public institutions because we've withdrawn our taxpayer support, right? And I think we need to recommit to low-cost or no-cost public higher education like we once had. That might be difficult for private schools like this one. But every school also, I think, needs to think about, are we making wise financial decisions? Do we need to spend money on the things that we're spending money on? Again, I don't know about here, but in general, there's been enormous administrative bloat, many more administrators than there used to be. I would just fire half of them to start with, and you could just do it by lottery. I don't even care which ones you fire. But also, listen, I mean, we talked about the customer service mentality, and one of the things that's about is colleges feeling that they need to compete with each other by offering more and more amenities, gyms and fancy dorms and maybe college students, what?
Lazy rivers.
The classic, the lazy river. But, I mean, if you didn't offer those things, college would be a more austere experience. And, again, easy for me to say, but I think maybe college students should be willing to accept and even welcome a more austere experience, almost, let's say, a monastic experience. Of course, they'd be getting something. They'd be getting a cheaper degree, a less expensive degree, which would be great for them.
So you think cost has something to do with the
Oh, it's absolutely.
inhibition of,
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you were making a very different kind of decision when college cost, $5,000 a year.
Thanks so much. I've already told you I'm going to do something unfair and ask a question about a book you wrote a long time ago. And I've already told you I'm a fan of the Jane Austen education book. But the part that has, and I loved it all, but the part that has really stayed with me was what you said about Northanger Abbey and Catherine learning to love a hyacinth, which actually seems to me deeply relevant to the real purpose of education. So I was just hoping that you could say something about that for our students.
Oh yeah, you really are bringing me back, and that was something that my professor kind of called my attention to. That so Henry teaches Catherine to love a hyacinth, right? And
It's actually his sister,
is it his sister?
Miss Tilney.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I think the thing that I pulled out there, and that my professor taught me, was that idea of learning to love. We were talking about love earlier today. I forget in what context, but the idea that, right, love and duty, right? So our understanding, like, what does it mean to learn to love something? And you're saying this is relevant to what we've been talking about the whole time. It's about learning to love. I mean, doesn't Plato say that education is the education of desire, right? You learn to love higher things, and that's or more difficult pleasures that are actually ultimately more rewarding. Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me.
Oh yeah.
Hi, and thank you for a great talk. I have to admit that as someone who works in PC's administration, I wish I could say I disagree with your lottery idea, but it might just work. You've mentioned T.S. Eliot, and that got me thinking about how in the last couple decades of his life, when he would go back across the pond, T.S. Eliot would give these lectures that filled stadiums. There was still, it seemed, a real hunger back in the 50s and 60s for that kind of thing. And I have a hard time imagining a poet filling a stadium nowadays. So I don't know if it's me being doom and gloom or if it's real. Do you think that there is, concurrent with the decline in reading, a decline in literature itself these days that is making it harder to get out of the funk? Do we still have those? Where's the modern day T.S. Eliot? Does he exist and he's just not being offered the stadium? Or is there a decline in the arts concomitant with the decline in reading?
Look, I mean, I don't have a comprehensive enough knowledge of the state of poetry or really of any other art to say that. I do think that there's good art, maybe even great art still being made, but I think what you're pointing to is it clearly has a different place in our culture now. There used to be a time when there was an aspiration to culture, especially among sort of the emerging middle class. I'm guessing that, I didn't know that about T.S. Eliot filling stadiums in the last 2 decades of his life, but the last decades of his life pretty much corresponded with the post-war decades. And there was this rising middle class that felt that part of what was incumbent upon them to do was to acquaint themselves with, engage with high culture. And, you know, a lot of it was just about social positioning, and a lot of it was, you know, can be laughed at or satirized. But I think a lot of it was real. This is the age of like the cheap paperback classics, right? Start to be published, right? Great books programs were still in place at a lot of schools. Leonard Bernstein would go on television and talk about classical music. Like, this was a real thing. In fact, it coincided with what we call the culture boom, where we were founding opera companies, ballet companies, museums, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a real thing. And I think especially it provided the opportunity for young people to step into this inheritance, which they especially would do in college. Like, I remember when I went to college in the 80s, like, you were still kind of expected to like, go to art house cinema and, like, read difficult books. Like, it was just part of your sort of self-respect. And again, a lot of it was just sort of, you know, so you could sort of sound smarter, but a lot of it was real. I mean, in fact, that's really how I was exposed to all of that. For all kinds of reasons, that doesn't really exist anymore. And reading serious poetry has become a niche interest. And so pretty much you know, I mean, Timothée Chalamet got a lot of criticism for saying, like, I like being in the movies because opera and ballet are dying, but he wasn't wrong. I don't know what to do about it, except to say that the individual always has a choice, right? It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. You can do it. You can do what you want, especially if you're young. You want to read serious poetry, you can do it. And if people think you're crazy or whatever, it doesn't matter.
We got time for maybe one or two more questions. We got a hand down here. Let's do this. Yeah, so 1, 2.
Yeah, dangerous thing to mention T.S. Eliot, and just that it made me think of one of my favorite lines from Eliot. I think it's in Little Gidding. It's in one of the 4 quartets where he says, old men should be explorers. And I was wondering if that insight doesn't offer a way to sort of harmonize something that you said, Bill, with maybe something that's a little different. You were saying that you're 62, I'm almost there. The older that we get, the more we don't want to sort of just keep on doing lots of different things. Maybe it's okay to do the same thing, the thing that we know and that we're good at and that we love. But I wonder if Eliot's line might help us to think, we can do both of these things. I mean, we can continue to play the instruments or read the books that we have confidence in, but within that, we actually get more exploratory and not less so because we're more comfortable. We're not just struggling to make the instrument sound okay. We actually know how to play. And so, I mean, if we're like Jim Keating, I mean, we know how to play the guitar really well, and we can discover new things on the instrument that would not have occurred to us when we were young and insecure and just beginning. So the reason why I'm treating us to this meditation is that I think it actually has implications for how we think about, our education here. When you're young, you're not just getting information or just getting data that you can use to get a job. You're actually developing interests and passions that will actually enrich your old age life so that you have the impetus and the confidence to be an explorer. And so, for me, life just gets better the older I get. And I think you want professors who have something of that spirit. And if your professors seem jaded and they're just going through the motions, then by all means tell them and see if you can get your money back. And if I get jaded, tell me, because that's a sign that I probably shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So I just want to take part of what you were saying, but then connect that to something of the spirit of what education I think needs to be, because there really is a community that involves old, middle, and young, and if it's not doing that, then something has gone wrong. But I actually have hope that it can be sustained, but I don't have a solution to the problem you were raising about the price tag. So,
no, I think that's all well said. I think that what I said before about just keep doing the thing that you're really good at, that's not a formula for stagnation. If anything, as you say, the opposite, that you can explore. And I think professors should be modeling that. And let me just say, I guess one formulation for what education should be about is that education should teach you to live well. And I thought of that because of what you said. If you do it right, this is going to be standing you in good stead 40 years from now.
So going back a little bit to the cost of higher education and to the previous dialogue of if you woke up again and you were 18, 19, I want to know, would you go to college? Because surely, barring a lucrative scholarship, doing all the things we were just talking about, it would be more cost effective to just stay at home and order these books on Amazon and find a good group with friends or just somewhere. Is universities worth, even though there's water coming in on the ship, is it worth to stay there, or is it worth to just be on your own? So what would you do?
Right. That's a fair question, and people have said what you've said. So I would say a few things. First of all, I do think the practical thing matters, and making a living that enables you to, support a family, that matters, and college makes a difference for that. I also think that I think it's hard to read on your own, and you talked about, getting a reading group together. I don't know that it works, that's so easy. Autodidacts tend to be kind of a little, Yeah. I mean, people do it. You know, Fran Lebowitz, the writer, said that she dropped out of high school so that she could have more time to read. But there aren't a lot of people like that. And I think also, so in other words, I think it's much easier to find that peer group in college, which doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy, but I think it's easier. And also, the role of the professor, right? Like, so there's someone who's really going to push you. That's the other thing. Is like, reading groups can be serious. They aren't only just like romance novels and white wine, but really getting pushed, I think, is irreplaceable. And I don't think that that usually just happens on your own or with a reading group. Not to mention the fact that the academic structure can introduce you things that you wouldn't even have known about otherwise. So, but it's not an obvious, you know, especially if you're spending a ton of money, it's not obvious what you should do.
Sorry to push it, but like, what would you do?
What would I do? Listen, it's impossible to know. I mean, I would go to college, but I would do it differently than I did it, right? As I've said, I think I wasted a lot of college. I think I studied the wrong thing. I think I didn't take things seriously. And part of it is just, you know, you're young, but I also don't feel like I had really good guidance. So I would like to have done it again with better mentorship.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and you join us next door in the great room. And first of all, though, a robust round of applause for Bill Deresiewicz.